Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Good evening, everyone, wherever you may be. Welcome to the latest edition of Natural Gas World's Canadian Gas Dialogues Pandemic Edition webinar series. My name is Dale Lunan. I'm the America's editor of Natural Gas World, and I'll be moderating today's session, which will look at the challenges facing market access for Canadian gas producers. Joining me today are Dale Nally, Alberta's Associate Minister of Natural Gas and Electricity, industry veteran Hal Quisley, Chair of ARC Resources and a member of the recent Alberta Natural Gas Advisory Panel, Tracy Robinson. I'm going to have to take a breath here now. Executive Vice President, TC Energy, President of TC Energy's Canadian Natural Gas Pipelines, and as of last week, President of Coastal GasLink. And finally, Dale Friesen, Senior Vice President of Corporate Affairs at ATCO Group. It's probably the first time in global webinar history that we've had three Dales on the same session. We'll try and keep everybody straight. As I mentioned, today we're going to be talking about market access for natural gas producers. Used to be the gas industry in Western Canada and everywhere else was pretty simple. Buy it, drill it, sell it. It's a bit different now. The shale gas revolution has changed the paradigm dramatically, and everything that directs and incents how producers do their business has changed. Back in 2005, before the shale revolution swept through North America, the Western Canadian industry drilled 16,000 wells. We were producing 17 billion cubic feet a day of natural gas. The benchmark price at AECO was north of $7 a million BTU, and the gas that was produced was valued at in excess of $51 billion. Fast forward to 2019, there were 820 wells completed last year. Production was still around 16 billion cubic feet a day, so that hadn't dropped off too much, but the price went south. For the year, it averaged about $1.22 US per MMBTU, and there were several times it dropped below $1 and several other times, especially during the low demand summer period, where it fell into negative territory, and that sure caused a lot of ruckus in the industry. The biggest thing that has changed since the shale revolution is that while Canadian producers benefited from it, so did the US producers. And the US used to be Canada's major natural gas market. In fact, Canada's only export natural gas market. Now that customer is our biggest competitor. And while the US gas sector has flourished, largely because it now has, since 2016, fairly substantive access to the global LNG market, Canada's gas producers have floundered. We're stuck with low natural gas prices. We don't have any access to the LNG space, and our producers are now at the wrong end of a very long supply chain that ends in only one place, the US. The only thing that's kept the industry going has been rigorous attention to cost control, almost daily technology innovations that have helped with that cost control. And they are, by virtue of that, able to basically remain somewhat competitive. That's not enough. There's no growth prospects in that kind of paradigm. What producers need now more than anything else is access to new markets, and that means LNG. They need access to new markets intrabasinally as well, and that's starting to happen in the power sector, in the petchem sector, and in some other areas, including the potential for hydrogen. Today we're going to look at those challenges. We're going to look at the opportunities and hopefully generate a lively discussion with our viewers and our guest panelists. With that, I'll have Minister Nally kick things off.
Hello, everyone. As Alberta's Associate Minister of Natural Gas and Electricity, it is a pleasure to be here to give my perspective on the future of natural gas in the province and what we're doing to support that future. The industry has faced a lot of headwinds these past few years between the growth of supply in the United States and limited opportunities to access new markets. Our producers have faced consistently low prices for their product. The COVID-19 pandemic has further complicated matters, implicating energy suppliers even more directly than a number of other industries. Combined with continued uncertainty over regulatory approval on infrastructure, we recognize that the gas industry is facing many challenges. However, there are a number of things to look forward to that paint a much more positive future for natural gas, and Alberta is well positioned to capitalize on these opportunities. The best news from an overall market viewpoint is that prices have largely stabilized in the short term. This provides a significant measure of stability for the industry and makes it much easier for potential investors to focus on other relevant factors when deciding where to invest. The other element that will ultimately impact prices and profitability is the substantial increase in global demand for natural gas that we see on the horizon. Countries around the world are recognizing the critical role that natural gas can play in reaching a cleaner energy future. In particular, we have our eye on Asia as a prime market. While a number of Asian countries seek to reduce their coal footprint, they will still need a stable and reliable source of energy. Natural gas is poised to fill that void, potentially leading to tremendous growth in demand. Canada and Alberta, as a key supplier, is extremely well positioned to meet that demand, with much shorter travel times to major Asian markets than many American counterparts. In terms of market access, another factor pulling in our favor is that several significant infrastructure projects are either underway or under consideration, demonstrating that Canada has the capability to advance complex, far-reaching infrastructure projects. Coastal GasLink is currently under construction, while two major oil lines, Keystone XL and TMX, are also in the active construction phase as well. On the West Coast, the Canada LNG project is underway. It represents one of the single largest project investments in Canadian history. To be clear, not just our energy sector, but in the history of our country. There remains considerable interest in East Coast LNG export facilities as well, meaning we could tap into a similar increase in natural gas demand in Europe. This is an important source of momentum as we look to the future and emerging energy sources like hydrogen, which will also need a robust infrastructure to meet regional, national, and international market demands. Most positive of all, though, is the consistent dedication of our natural gas industry itself, overcoming all of the hurdles that have come up in the past several years while still focusing on emerging opportunities. It is an absolute testament to the dedication, intelligence, and hard work of Alberta's energy sector, and particularly those in natural gas. In the face of sustained low prices, these companies have innovated and become of some of the lowest cost producers on this planet. These companies can compete with the best in the world, and they can do it in a low-cost environment. And the Alberta government is looking to support that hard work going forward, even in the face of COVID-19. This spring, we sped up our planned reduction in the corporate tax rate to a Canadian leading 8%, making us one of the lowest tax jurisdictions in North America. We're also dedicated to continuing to work closely with our industry partners, a commitment that started well before the onset of this pandemic. Building on the Roadmap to Recovery report from 2018, to help guide our interactions with industry, we engaged extensively with industry in 2019 as well as 2020. The result of that ongoing conversation has been something that we've been finalizing over the past several months, the natural gas vision and the strategy. It will lay out our goals for the future of the industry and provide a path forward for how the government will enable innovation and diversification within the natural gas sector. We will be sharing this strategy in the coming weeks. As a sneak peek, though, it's fair to say that diversification is a central tenet of that strategy. Supporting that diversification requires a robust infrastructure, including pipelines to ensure a reliable supply of natural gas, a supply that can reach economic clusters and communities in the province that need it in order to support the shifts and changes that are already underway. It's not just the traditional natural gas markets that we're looking to participate in, though. We are looking to expand Alberta's presence across the entire natural gas value chain. For example, this July, we announced the Alberta Petrochemical Incentive Program to help attract large petrochemical manufacturers to the province. We see the future of Alberta's natural gas not just in producing and selling the fuel itself, but in finding and developing other centers of excellence that can grow in the province and build upon existing strengths. One key area where we're working hard to support natural gas producers is in highlighting our environmental, social, and governance performance on the national and international stages. ESG is becoming a key metric for investors, and we are extremely proud of our high standing. We will continue telling the positive story of Alberta's energy sector, including the story of natural gas. We'll also continue working with our colleagues in other provinces and the federal government to advance that story, as well as move key infrastructure projects through the regulatory process. That collaboration will also be important as we explore new energy sources connected to natural gas, such as hydrogen, which has a bright future in Alberta and the country as a whole. Whether we're telling the story of Canadian energy to an international audience or seeking consensus on a major nation-building project like Trans Mountain or LNG Canada, it benefits all parts of the country to work together and chart a shared future for the energy sector, especially natural gas. We look forward to continuing to work with all of our partners, federal and provincial governments, industry, Indigenous communities, and international investors to build that brighter future for natural gas. On that note, I'd like to thank you for having me here today, and I look forward to today's discussions.
Thank you, Minister Nally. We'll now turn things over to Hal Quisley. Hal?
Thanks, Dale, and good morning, everyone. I've been involved in the natural gas business for about 45 years, and over that time, it's often been described as the fuel of the future. For many decades, we've seen the attributes of natural gas. It's clean burning, it has low carbon emissions, it's easy to transport with the infrastructure we have in place, and it's ideal for home heating, electric generation, and many industrial processes. To the point that over the last 25 years, North American natural gas consumption has increased by more than 60%, and demand remains strong today. Electricity generation has, of course, been the dominant driver of that growth in demand in the past decade, and today the power gen sector accounts for about 40% of North American natural gas demand. In terms of Western Canadian access to market, two of our largest markets, Eastern Canada and the Northeast US, have really been taken over by production from the Marcellus in Pennsylvania. 30 BCF a day out of a total market of 100 BCF a day is a big change, and that has come on stream essentially in the last 10 years, and that's really impaired the economics of producing and shipping gas from Alberta to hubs in Ontario, Chicago, and the Northeast US. Interestingly, at the same time, our own resource base here in Western Canada has grown. It's not just doubled or tripled, it's grown exponentially. And this is the result of technological developments in terms of drilling and fracture stimulation of the Montney, various deep basin horizons, the Duvernay, and other tight gas deposits, of which we have a lot in Western Canada. The driver's really been technology related to horizontal drilling, fracking, and producing of these wells. So that 15 years ago, the prevailing view was if we can find some natural gas, we will easily find a market for it and generate cash flow fairly quickly. Today, we've got a lot more developable gas in place in Western Canada than we can possibly sell here in North America, notwithstanding the dramatic growth in the North American market. And as Minister Nally pointed out, it's really opportunities in the international LNG market that we need to look to. But let me touch for a minute on the domestic market. There's 3 or 4 opportunities here that I think our governments should be very focused on. The first is the conversion of coal-fired power plants to natural gas. This was proceeding well in Alberta until 2015-2016, when decision was taken that natural gas was not clean enough from an environmental point of view, and the focus would really be on wind and solar and other renewable forms of energy. And this is really unfortunate because natural gas does reduce emissions from coal-fired power plants by about 60% and is a great way to reduce emissions over the next 25 or 30 years. But it's been made difficult by the imposition of carbon taxes on natural gas and the imposition more recently or coming of some very complex policy called the Natural Gas Clean Fuel Standard, which is going to be a real problem. Many oil-based industrial processes have been converting to natural gas as a result of the abundance, and that's been very positive from both the gas demand and the CO2 emissions perspective. Today, though, the big opportunity is in LNG. Exports out of Kitimat or Prince Rupert or other locations on the West Coast actually should give us a tremendous competitive advantage over American players seeking to export out of the US Gulf Coast. The Pacific Coast is just so much closer for shipping to Asia, and that's the major growing market opportunity. But unfortunately today, those kind of projects just face an almost unbelievable web of federal blockade. I can't think of better words to describe it than that. Federal policy, federal regulation, and Supreme Court decisions have made the building of Canadian LNG export facilities not only time-consuming and difficult to get through the regulatory process, but at the end of the day, we struggle to be cost competitive with what goes on in the US Gulf Coast. And this is a great tragedy of our time, that to be so competitively advantaged and to see that advantage erode has just been a problem. I think that the federal activist agenda driven on CO2 reduction, and particularly this coming clean fuel standard, will continue to impair the economics of natural gas development here in Western Canada. And that is something I think that the Alberta, BC, and Canadian government should be very concerned about and very focused on. With just a couple of quick comments. One is that how our industry has performed during the COVID crisis. Western Canadian producers in both BC and Alberta have demonstrated a remarkable ability to sustain flat production at much lower capital investment levels than we would have previously thought possible. And this is very encouraging. It takes a lot of capital and a lot of rapid investment to grow production from 10 to 15 to 20 BCF a day. But we've now demonstrated that our ability to sustain flat production at 15 or 20 BCF a day can be done very economically. And this is critical for the long-term economics of LNG export projects. The second thing is that unlike many other sectors in our economy, our gas producers have kept their wells and production facilities on stream and brought new wells and new plants on stream right through the COVID crisis, while at the same time protecting their employees and contractors from COVID infection. This is a real success story, and we continue to operate near 100% utilization of our gas business, and many other industries, as I noted, are way down from that. So it's been one of the few bright spots in the Canadian economy in 2020. Gas prices are strong because gas production has declined in the United States. And perhaps our federal government will take notice of this and become more supportive of natural gas with its strong environmental record and the potential to deliver clean natural gas to growing markets at home and abroad. And I'll stop there. I guess I'd just say in conclusion that the industry enjoys strong support from the government here in Alberta and from the government in BC. And we very much appreciate that support and the assistance they give us in not only moving things forward, but remaining optimistic. But we have a significant problem at the federal level, and I think we need to keep focused on that in terms of policy, bureaucratic delay, regulatory delay through Canadian energy regulatory processes. No better example of the great delays in expansions to the NGTL system here in Alberta, which is pretty straightforward expansion, but it's been delayed many times. So I'll stop there. I think you get my message. We have a problem at the federal level.
Thanks, Hal. That's quite a laundry list that the industry needs to work through in the next little period of time. Just a quick reminder to please have your questions ready. Submit them under the Q&A button on the GoToWebinar panel. Don't use the chat feature. And with that, I'll turn things over to Tracy Robinson, TC Energy. Tracy.
Thanks, Dale. Good morning, and thank you for persevering in moving this to a virtual community. I'd like to talk just a little bit about the WCSB and competitiveness. I think that, you know, further to what the minister and Halbo said, we're fortunate the WCSB has proven to be both one of the most prolific and one of the most cost competitive basins on the Cline. If you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. You know, on the continent, no matter what price stack you look at, and there's one on this slide here, the basin, particularly in areas like the Montney, rank only behind associated gas as the most cost competitive across North America. Now that means that this gas should take its place in many of the downstream markets. It does, and you know, important part of that is the role the NGTL system plays. One of the benefits of the NGTL system is that if you come in to that network, and nearly 80% of the gas in the basin does, you have access to a number of important downstream markets. So almost half of it, 45%, feeds the growing appetite for gas in the Alberta market. You heard the minister talk about the incentives that are going in place in order to continue to increase the use of gas locally here. That's a healthy, important home market, and it is continuing to grow. Just under a quarter, 22% of it travels down the main line and into Eastern Canada and Northeast US. You heard Al talk about, you know, our diminishing presence in that market, but I would tell you that our gas can still be competitive. Eastern Canada, still about 50% of that gas comes from our basin, 10% in the US Northeast, and that's despite that region sitting on top of that big supply base in the Marcellus Appalachian Basin. So we can be competitive in that market. You can also get to MidCon. More and more difficult to get there given the presence of associated gas, but we retain a presence there. And the best place to buy gas if you're in the Pacific Northwest or Northern California continues to be the WCSB. Also best place to sell gas if you're in the WCSB, and our presence there continues to grow. We are positioned to access global markets as well. You've heard both Hal and the minister talk about LNG. Our low cost base, our proximity to Asia, you know, we're working towards that end with Coastal GasLink and LNG Canada. So this diversification and ability to access a number of markets is important for our basin. And, you know, it allows us to push to be competitive in more and more markets. On the next slide, please. And we know that it's important for us to continue to grow presence of the basin's gas across these markets. And to that end, you know, we are working with our customers in the basin to expand egress. So this year we've brought in a BCF a day of new winter capacity. And since 2018, 600 million cubic feet a day of summer capacity. And over the next 3 years, we will create another 3.5 BCF a day of increased egress capacity to move this basin's gas into markets across the continent. And this slide just demonstrates where that capacity is going to be added. 1.7 BCF a day intra-basin, which is our local Alberta market, home market. Another half a BCF to the Pacific Northwest and the US West Coast. And 1.3 BCF a day out of Alberta onto the main line and into Eastern markets. So that 3.5 BCF a day represents about a 30% increase in the egress that our system on NGTL provides to North American markets. And if you look at the basin as a whole, it's about a 23% increase. So we are positioned to grow. We know this gas is competitive. And if you'll go to the next slide, please. And we believe that it's also well positioned to be competitive in global markets. So it's not an easy path. You heard Hal talk about it to get to the West Coast and onto water. But with that kind of cost competitiveness of this basin's gas and our proximity to Asia, I think we're positioned as a viable source of gas for those markets as well. So the first pipe to do this, CGL, Coastal GasLink's under construction now. We have 2,700 people along the pipe path now. As we head towards the last few weeks of the construction season, we're laying pipe across some parts of the route. We're working to finish clearing on others. But when complete in phase 1, it's going to transport just over 2 BCF a day from the basin to the West Coast for export by LNG Canada's joint venture partners. So that is also important, important part of the growth story of this basin on top of the 3.5 BCF a day that will build into the North American markets. Now we know that the LNG Canada market continues to evolve, but all forecasts that we see for the need of waterborne gas, particularly in Asia, remain strong. And so we hope that the West Coast of Canada will play an increasing role in that. I do want to make the next slide, please. I want to make just one final comment on storage. Although it's not a market, it's an important part of the proper functioning of the basin. And we know that it's critical to be able to get gas into storage in the summer months when demand here declines by 2 BCF a day or more. And that gas needs to go somewhere, it needs to go into storage. And we need it in there in the winter months so that we have gas available to respond to market opportunities. So we are just concluding in this summer period what will be the largest storage fill in the last, or perhaps the second largest, we'll see how the season ends, in the last 20 years, with more on average than a BCF a day moving into storage over this season. So NGTL, as you know, is contracted firm basis, which means that our customers may take out firm contracts on our capacity. And this is what underlies both the operation and the expansion of the system. So if you make a firm commitment, you have a priority. For any capacity that's not consumed by these firm contracts, that's made available on a daily or weekly or spot basis as an interruptible or as available. The difficulty with storage in the NGTL system is that access to storage is available only on this interruptible basis. So normally there is capacity available, not always on the day that it's needed, and this has been an issue in the past. We know that in industry we need to solve this problem. Last summer, industry agreed on a temporary basis to have us restrict firm contracted flows to favor interruptible flows into storage in certain circumstances, only in the summer, only when we're doing maintenance. We don't believe that, we used it last October, haven't used it yet this year because we haven't needed it. We think that it's not the right permanent solution for a number of reasons. Only applies when we need to constrain flows during maintenance, only applies to storage facilities downstream of the bottleneck, and most importantly, it constrains firm contracted volumes in favor of interruptible volumes. So temporary protocol is in place. We have filled storage, haven't had to use it yet this year, and we're going to be well positioned by the end of the season with one of the largest storage injections over the past 20 years. I'll leave that one at that. I'll just conclude. Dale was saying that I also want to be optimistic. I think that this basin is strong and it's growing, and it's a testament to the ingenuity of the producers in our region, into the government with wanting to inspire a bigger and better gas, both production and market, and with all who work in the industry to position this in this basin where it needs to be. We believe that gas from this basin should continue not only to be well positioned across North America, but we do look forward to see it take its place in what we hope will be a very healthy global LNG market. Thanks, Dale.
Thanks very much, Tracy. That string of pipes stretching off to the Pacific Ocean is indeed a sight for sore eyes, and a BCF a day into storage this summer is a music to a producer's ears. Thank you very much for that. I'll turn things now over to Dale number 2, Dale Friesen from ATCO Group here in Calgary. Dale.
Great, thanks, Dale. Just next slide, please. So ATCO's been in the gas industry for just over 100 years, and we have a great interest in it, and of course, very active in Alberta with 1.2 million customers and almost 800,000 in Western Australia. So natural gas, we believe, has just got, it is a wonderful fuel, and one of the fuels that is such a low-cost way for consumers to heat their homes and to produce power. And we believe it's got a lot of advantages. One of them is also when you convert over to natural gas in the power production or industry, you're reducing your emissions of GHGs by at least 60%, often much better than that or better than that. So it's a tremendous story. You also eliminate your SOx emissions. You eliminate mercury, heavy metals, PM2.5, and massive reductions of NOx. So there's such a great environmental story to be had. Just go to the next slide. However, we believe that there are challenges, especially in a policy framework, federally in particular, going forward, that could impact what we believe are some of the most important aspects, in that energy needs to be affordable, reliable, sustainable. We have to maintain investor confidence, and the prior speakers have done a tremendous job of speaking on many of these attributes. We believe if energy isn't affordable, governments can find enormous pushback, and it can really impact the ability of even some of the environmental objectives that governments have. It can impede them as people push back, and we saw that in Ontario. And I think at this point, we're concerned about clean fuel standard. We'll talk briefly on that a little bit more. But we believe that this is a time for governments to pause and to stabilize. And any regulations, particularly federally, that are impacting negatively consumer pricing or negatively impacting the competitiveness of Canadian businesses, which many are on the ropes, and not just in Western Canada, but many they're here as well. It should be paused so we can stabilize and get our feet under us, and to really think about the holistic nature of policy. Next slide. So as we've heard, the growth of natural gas has been quite incredible. And one of the sides we've been in has been the power generation market, and now that's been purchased by others. We believe that the coal to gas conversion is a huge source of demand, as Hal was saying earlier, and potential opportunity for the market in Alberta. And it brings us many benefits in providing stable, reliable power that is there when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow. And the reliability of the natural gas system is often taken for granted. And if you look at it, it is one of the most reliable sources of power generation that you can have on the planet. And that's something that doesn't get enough credit. Next slide. So going forward, we believe some of the best opportunities include the coal to gas conversions, which have been talked about, petrochemical, Dale Nally talked about, Minister Nally, and hydrogen is another. And with that, also transportation, the use of, when we think of the LNG market, which was talked about by Tracy and Hal, we think tremendous opportunity on the West Coast for the growth of these markets. In focusing more on the Alberta, we look at the petrochemical and some of the very positive legislation and regulation that Minister Nally and his colleagues have been bringing in to help support that industry, which we think is very important. We also look at hydrogen as an opportunity, particularly on the heating, space heating aspect. And I'll get to this a little bit later, but there's a lot of talk of electrification and the benefits of electrification. And we took a look at Alberta, and this is stealing from a slide that comes later, and it would cost roughly $70 billion to convert space heating for industry and residences in Alberta to just electrify. And that excludes the costs. That excludes the cost of the additional power generation that would be required. Whereas the use of hydrogen to blend with natural gas allows us to retain many of the good jobs. We're using a product, we would be making the product, the blue hydrogen, from natural gas using steam methane reformation, and there's another method, but essentially using steam methane reformation and CCS, you have a very low cost way of producing a clean fuel with no emissions, blending it with natural gas to keep your existing natural gas infrastructure relevant as we move forward to 2050 and beyond. Next slide, please. Alberta has a unique advantage in the world, and Alberta is the second lowest cost producer of low carbon hydrogen in the world. Russia claims to be lower, and that's at the very bottom. And then next up is Canada. Natural gas with CCS is second lowest in the world. So that's a huge advantage. Next slide, please. We also believe with CCS, of which Alberta is particularly blessed with the geological formations to do carbon capture and sequestration or utilization of the CO2 that's captured for enhanced oil recovery, is a combination that much of the world would be very envious of. We've spoken to our counterparts in the UK who are looking at the Leeds project for hydrogen injection in their residences in the city of Leeds. And they are very envious of Alberta's position for low cost CCS access and access also to markets. Next slide. Or if we just go back for 1 sec. Sorry, just the previous slide, apologies. The other thing that we believe is with the access to the low-cost hydrogen, it could create an opportunity for a hydrogen market that we could potentially, using the existing or other gas networks, to supply hydrogen to global markets through either the west or east coast. So it could, over time, also create a new exciting market for Alberta's natural gas. Next slide. Clean fuel standards, Hal mentioned this earlier. I've been very involved in the clean fuel standards, and one of the things that is not well understood on this regulation, and it is huge and could be very punitive, is that Canada is the only nation in the world that is looking at applying the clean fuel standard to essentially all fuels. So you've got your gaseous fuels, your solid, and your liquid fuels. And if you look at, by comparison, California, who's usually pretty aggressive in terms of environmental initiatives, their clean fuel standard would be like this compared to the breadth of the proposed clean fuel standards for Canada. And the implications are very, very significant in the cost that they can add to the cost of heating homes. And this will be additive. It will be on top of the already present carbon tax, which will over time increase. So these are very big threats to competitiveness and to consumers as they seek to heat their homes and to, where it's used for transportation, impacting businesses' competitiveness. So we think that this is, once again, a time for the federal government to pause, allow industry to stabilize, and let's take a more holistic view, because as we come out of COVID, industries and countries around the world will be focusing on how they can become more competitive. And Canada cannot afford, if we value our economy, to ignore the fact that the world will not become less competitive, it will become more competitive. And so it's the time to pause and reconsider and look at the best way forward to maintain the affordability, reliability of our system. Next slide. This is what I spoke about earlier, and this is the estimate for cost of electrification in Alberta, $6.82 billion, and that would be on top of all of the work that would be required for new power gen. So significant, and if we can maintain the jobs and the royalties from natural gas and utilize hydrogen to help to clean up, lower the emissions on space heating, you can save billions and billions of dollars over just a straight electrification. Last slide. And so just in closing, we believe that natural gas has a bright future, and there's a lot of exciting developments, and we applaud the Alberta government for some of their recent policies and what they're seeking to do. We have enjoyed, just looking at trying to discover what opportunities are there, but the threats, they're real, and we need to work together as a country to try to address this and to make the country stronger and think about the jobs and competitiveness as we go forward. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Dale. I appreciate those comments, and I think we may want to dive a little bit more into the hydrogen question a little bit later in the discussion. We do have several questions have come in. This first one is perhaps something to be directed to Hal and Minister Nally. This viewer says that he has traveled the world extensively over the last half dozen years or so, and he's talked energy policy extensively, and he recognizes that the world wants Canadian gas. Canadian gas is desirable from a whole lot of perspectives. It's clean. Canada's ESG metrics are exemplary. It leads several international lists on everything ranging from human rights to inclusivity and diversity. But still, the investment dollars aren't there. And that is down, as Hal mentioned, to the ridiculously complex regulatory process, the starts and the stops. I mean, NGTL 2021 has been, what, Tracy, 4 years in the making, and it's still sitting on somebody's in basket in Ottawa. Is there anything that the industry or anybody can do to get the federal government to take this a little bit more seriously so that this potential for investment dollars flowing in isn't missed? Mr. Nally, how do you
go first?
I was going to offer it to you, Hal, because the first thing that comes to my mind is you ask for what's the one thing you can do. I can tell you, you can elect a conservative government. That's what you could do. And, you know, I don't want to get too political on this, but, you know, the question nails it. I mean, Alberta has the solution to our climate problem. Those coal-fired power plants in Asia. We have the solution to energy poverty. Get natural gas, get energy to India and China, and to give people access to clean, affordable electricity, to create economic opportunity. I mean, it's just a basic human right. So we have the solution, but yeah, one of the biggest challenges we have is the regulatory lag in this country. The good news is that the agree with us on LNG. There is no light between the province and the federal government when it comes to LNG. And I specifically asked Minister Regan that question. I said that I know that you support LNG, but does your government support LNG? Because listen, we all know that there are climate alarmists in the cabinet. And the good news is that Minister Regan was unequivocal in saying that the federal government supports LNG, and so that we just have to keep pushing forward with the LNG.
Dale, I'll add to what Minister Nally just said, that certainly at the political level, we have the problem that some well-known activists that would encourage the shutdown of the oil sands and the cessation of hydrocarbon production in Western Canada are in very influential staff positions in Ottawa today. And those people are carrying a big part of the agenda, things that they promoted in Alberta here in terms of shutting down industry for a couple of decades, are now actively part of the Liberal government's political agenda. So I think we all recognize that problem, and I'd love to see the solution that Minister Nally advocates occur. But the problem's deeper than that. The bureaucracy in Ottawa, even during the Harper years, was unbelievably difficult and resistant to changes, to the point that some of us convinced the Prime Minister and Minister Jim Prentice to establish the Major Projects Management Office to figure out ways to get these applications through federal departments, Departments of Fisheries and Oceans, Department of Environment, many others that actively blockade and passively sit on applications for months on end with nothing occurring. So we have the bureaucracy problem in addition to the political problem. And then beyond that, you've got the regulatory problem, where when I was at TransCanada, I had to work very quietly because, as Tracy knows, you don't want to rock the boat too much here. But National Energy Board processes were getting increasingly ponderous and complicated and time consuming. And we were pushing hard to try to get that cleaned up on the regulatory front. Finally, Government of Canada and the Supreme Court decisions regarding Indigenous positions and rights are difficult. No industry has worked more closely with Indigenous groups and delivered more benefits to Indigenous groups than the energy sector. And yet the Supreme Court has made one decision after another that makes it very difficult, almost impossible for some of these projects to go ahead. As Minister Nally said, the world does indeed want our LNG. As the person who posed this question said, internationally, there's a great appetite for it. But we've got to get our act together. If we want to be competitors in that market, we've just got to be a lot more nimble, a lot more quick, and a lot more cost effective. And the single biggest barriers we have right now are all federal in nature, whether they're political, bureaucratic, regulatory, or bogged down in the courts.
Thanks, Al. Tracy, anything you'd like to contribute, weigh in on the regulatory front?
I would just say that, it's an obvious difficulty. If we go to our customers and contract as we have for increased egress, either capacity to connect to the system or to get to market, we're asking them to do that 4 years in advance of being able to deliver that capacity. And the market, moves much more quickly than that. If we want to be competitive in today's marketplace, and much of what we're trying to do is in jurisdictions other than Canada, right, as we're trying to get gas into those marketplaces, we have to be far more nimble. I mean, this gas that we produce here, our producers have done their job and found a way, technology, innovation after innovation, to extract it competitively. We're working very hard to keep our tolls to a level that we can deliver it competitively. But all of that is for naught if we can't be nimble and respond to markets as they evolve. Right? So that's, if we want to be in this country a producer, an exporter of resource products, that has to be front and center for us. And right now, as Hal and the minister says, it's very wieldy. It's got a lot of guck in that engine, and it's not easy to move quickly.
Okay, thanks. Another question here from a viewer, and it's petrochemical side of the demand equation. So perhaps Minister Nally could address this, and the others could. And the government has a couple petrochemical programs to incent investment in petrochemical. Is that really a silver bullet in terms of vis-a-vis diversification? A lot of the petrochem processing is normally located closer to end markets, Pennsylvania and Houston. So can a Canadian market or manufacturing base or clustered in West really compete and be a meaningful end user and demand market for Canadian producers?
Absolutely. I was in Japan before Christmas, and I can tell you we were there. The message of Alberta's natural gas value chain in the Western Canadian Basin, and part of that included petrochemical. And some eyes were opened about our access and speed to market. And we have some real advantages getting our petrochemicals to Asia because speed to market. If you build in Louisiana, and then you have to go through the Panama Canal, we can get it to our West Coast and get it to Asia much quicker. So strategically, we have some competitive advantages. And but to answer your question, I don't think it's a silver bullet. I think that it's one of many things that we need to do. We need to develop our natural gas industry that includes petrochemical. It has to include hydrogen, has to include LNG. So diversification is more than just petrochemical. So I don't see it as a silver bullet, but I see it as an extremely important bullet.
Anybody else care to weigh in on that one? Al, Dale? No? Okay. What else have we got here? Here's one. Is it possible to export environmental standards? California has recently banned the intern. I think they said by 2035 there will be no ICEs sold in the state. Is it possible to export those standards, Canada or Alberta's environmental standards, and further to the electric car question, the electric vehicle question? Is that do you see that as a substantive demand threat for Canadian natural gas?
Absolutely not. And our premier, our premier addressed that, and he was vilified for it. But the fact is, in rural India, there's no use for electric cars. They do not have access to affordable clean energy. We're talking large parts of the global population that doesn't have access to electrification. So Tesla is not going to help them in rural India. And we talk about 50% of our population that goes to bed hungry at night. It's no coincidence that that's the same percent that don't have access to clean, affordable energy. And so a Tesla is going to be of no use. Right now, a Tesla is great for suburbanites in North America that want to virtue signal, I suppose. And listen, we think that it's a great product, but no, I don't see it as a threat for the foreseeable future.
Dale, it's Hal here. I think there's a very high-level way to look at this, and take Canada's greenhouse gas policies right now. There's really two games going on. One is we produce hydrocarbons in Canada, we move them across the country, we refine them, and as consumers, we burn them or use them for fuel. And at the point of consumption, we emit about 80% to 90% of the CO2 from the full value chain. And I believe that if Canadians want to reduce domestic CO2 emissions, we need to look at that value chain, and we need to figure out the best way to change it. And some of that might involve going to electric vehicles in densely populated cities where trips are short and recharging is easy. That's sensible. In much of the country, though, trips are not short, trips are long, and recharging is not practical, and fueling vehicles with either gasoline, diesel, or natural gas makes a lot more sense. The other part of this, though, is Canada's one of the world's greatest exporters of hydrocarbon fuels. And in the export game, we're competing against Russia, Saudi Arabia, even the United States, none of whom have these expensive burdens placed on their production industries. And so as producers, we're bearing extra costs, even though our ESG standards are higher than almost anyone in the world, and we operate in a cleaner and better way than almost anyone. We have these extra costs imposed on us while we're trying to compete in international markets. And at a really fundamental level, this is where I think Canadians need to take another look at our whole approach to the Paris Accord and to GHG reductions in general. Let's aspire to whatever Canadians want us to aspire to in terms of our own domestic value chains and domestic emissions. That if we want to impose heavy carbon taxes at the point of consumption, that's up to the voters to decide. They'll like it or they won't like it, and they'll make a change. But when we come to exporting into international markets, we've got to pay attention to who our competitors are. And we've got to make sure that we don't burden our Canadian producers and our Canadian pipeline companies and our international shipping companies with a bunch of burdens that the Russians, the Saudis, the Middle East producers, and the Americans are not putting on their producers. And so I think there's a real fundamental mistake in our federal carbon policy. They're failing to look at that in a competitive way. And this COVID crisis, I think, just heightens the need to look at everything in a competitive way. And I hope that change of perspective comes about sooner rather than later.
Yes, so do I. The change in perspective is definitely needed on the part of most Canadians. We've got about 5 minutes left, and I see Dale too sitting there, and he seems lonely. So this one's going to be something that he may want, or I'm sure will want to weigh in on, and it has to do with the hydrogen equation, or whether it's a hydrogen equation or not. I'm going to steal something that Hal mentioned during our discussions leading up to this is that he has this wonderful product that he wants to put a patent on, and it's a carbon molecule surrounded by 4 hydrogen molecules. And it's worked wonderfully well for the last century or so. It's called natural gas. Why is, and I think Tracy has some comments on the hydrogen part of it as well. Why is hydrogen, I mean, it has quickly grown and really since COVID began into becoming the silver bullet for the global climate change challenge. Why is that? I mean, hydrogen has a lot of issues of its own. I mean, it's hard to transport. It's not merely a matter of sticking it in a pipeline. You can put 5 or 10% in with natural gas, but it's a lot less dense, so it requires a lot more compression. You just can't switch a natural gas transmission pipeline over to move hydrogen. Why is that seen as a silver bullet? And Hal and Tracy, maybe you can be devil's advocates for the natural gas side as opposed to hydrogen.
Thanks, Dale. And I love that example of the miracle fuel, the CH4, because it is a miracle fuel, and I think it's massively underrated. And so, not to take away from it, we see hydrogen really is just a product you can make from CH4, and it's like another product, and you can take it, and there's a demand for it globally. There's an enormous demand. I was talking to Peter Terzakian about it. Months ago, probably pre-COVID. It was pre-COVID. And asking him about hydrogen, he says, Dale, I raised $2 billion roughly for hydrogen 20 years ago, and it was the thing then. And then it had its time, and then it's faded. But it is back, and I think even Peter, and without him being here to defend it, I think even Peter sees that this time there's more momentum. It feels more real, but. Said, I'm not going to speak for Peter, but we look at it and saying, when you look at the cost of electrification, because we've talked to federal government, and one of the folks we spoke to said, in terms of meeting the Paris Accord, you have to electrify everything. And when we look at it, electrifying everything, particularly in Alberta and Saskatchewan, would actually increase cost to consumers massively. And we said, $62 billion just for the conversion, not including the cost of generation, which is largely going to have to be natural gas anyway. But you look at the fact that it would also increase emissions. Like, you're going to increase emissions. So if you look at it pragmatically, and hence the pause, if you are electrifying everything, particularly in provinces that rely more on fossil fuels, you could actually have an unintended consequence of significantly increasing costs and emissions. And so we need to rethink that. And just on the EVs, we have both electrical and gas distribution and transmission. So we're fans of both. We think EVs will play a role. But one of the things that's often forgotten on EVs is when you look at the load, a new fast charger today is about 1/3 of a megawatt to charge one. You think of that, that's like 350,000 watt generators running away just to charge one car. And so the loads and the demands on your distribution infrastructure where we live, it cannot sustain mass electrification without significant costs. And the Boston Consulting Group, who looked at this very closely in California, their study indicated that your cost can be as high as over $3,000 US per vehicle that's added to the charging system to harden the distribution and transmission infrastructure. And I believe that excludes the cost of adding the new generation. So my quick math of the ICE canceling all the internal combustion engines in California by 2035, which is similar to Europe, I figure it's, in US dollars, probably over 52 billion just to harden the distribution and transmission network. And those costs are not being talked about. And that's why we need to pause and really look at this thoughtfully instead of just, ideologically, because this is not being carefully considered.
All right, we have a couple minutes left, or we're going to run a couple minutes over. We had one late question come in, and it actually is kind of a corollary to the EV market, or the EV question. Displacing diesel with LNG in rail and on-road transportation is a meaningful opportunity to decrease GHG emissions domestically, not to mention a new domestic market for our natural gas. What role can our provincial and federal governments play in facilitating that transition? And maybe I'll start with Minister Nally, and we'll just go around the clock.
Well, I mean, our position has always been that there's very few things that that government does better than business, and so we think that the best thing that we can do is get out of the way of business and create a friendly regulatory environment to encourage those types of technological advancements and allow industry to lead the way. So what we could do is essentially get out of the way and have some certainty to the regulatory environment that will allow them to move those projects forward.
Hal, your thoughts?
Yeah, Dale, if you roll the clock back to 2009, 2010, I was one of the federal government's advisors at the Copenhagen climate event. And there were all kinds of ideological ideas being put around about how the whole world needed to convert to wind, solar, and all electric vehicles and things like that. And one of the things that a group of us from Calgary managed to convince Minister Prentice and Prime Minister Harper of was that natural gas should be defined as the clean fuel standard. In other words, if you're burning natural gas, you're exempt from carbon tax, and carbon taxes on other fuels would be progressively higher to the extent they emit more CO2 than natural gas would. And
Utopia.
This was seen as the easiest way to significantly accelerate the conversion of diesel trucks, rail systems, oil-based heating, all of those kind of things to natural gas. And it was understood at the time that it would be the best way to make a significant impact on GHG emissions in Canada. And converting coal-fired plants to natural gas was one big example. And Alberta's done a lot of that. Unfortunately, it's more difficult to do that than it should be, because the federal government has now imposed carbon tax on natural gas-fired power plants. So they should not do that. That was a counterproductive, serious error. So I just want to point out that there are ways that this could have been encouraged, and I think it's a great opportunity. Long-haul trucking could be heavily fueled. Rail systems could be fueled by LNG or CNG, and we have the wrong policies in place today.
Okay, anybody else like to chime in on that?
Yeah, Hyliion just announced that they've got a new line of CNG trucks, which also use a hybrid electric system to extend the range. So they now can meet the same range requirements as your diesel, which was a big restriction. You know, the range anxiety on the compressed natural gas was a problem as well. And they're claiming that they can address that. So there's a lot of advancements, and I think a tremendous opportunity to, as you say, use natural gas for long-haul transport as well, and dramatically reduce emissions and to increase consumption of natural gas.
Excellent. So the technology is there. It would just be wonderful if the policy could catch up. That puts us at a little bit past noon. We've gone our allotted time and then some. I'd like to thank everyone, Dale, Tracy, Dale number 2, and Hal for spending an hour or so with us this morning. We appreciate your remarks, and we appreciate the questions that came in from the audience. With that, thank you very much. Viewers, please don't forget to join us on Wednesday at 11 a.m. when we'll take a deeper dive into Canada's shale gas opportunities and learn from the producers about some of the challenges that we talked about here today. Again, thanks everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.